mucosal surfaces. So if you have goggles or an eye shield, you should use it. I mean, it's not universally recommended, but if you really want to be complete, you should probably use it if you can. It's just that it's so easy for people to just make a cloth mask.
I think we're going to get to a point where eye protection is.
Into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And ready and raring to go, as always.
Yes.
Until I hear bad news, and then I say, what are we doing? But we always talk ourselves into saying, we're doing a little bit here and a little bit there.
That's right.
And we get encouragement from people who will come and listen and say, you're on the right track. But we know that there's a group of people thinking along the lines that we are, and we want to encourage that. But it's endless. It's not like, if we continue to do this, it's not like we're going to work ourselves out of a job. You know, it's going to be around a while. And this guy that's the new man on the block, he's been around about less than 6 months, this Fauci guy. I'll tell you, I really have to admit, I didn't know that name until he decided he was a dictator.
Yeah.
And a threat to my personal liberties. Yeah. And a lot of misinformation. So that's what's going on, and we're fighting that. And it's a worldwide thing, but there's a disagreement here. Dr. Fauci is not nearly as respectable in the medical community as he used to be. The trouble is, if some in the medical community challenges him, they don't get support from the media, and the media reaches more people than a small group of doctors. But it's probably a large group of doctors who's trying to survive and taking care of their patients under these dire circumstances, and then they have to, listen to all the nonsense. So the country is split. But I don't think it's irrevocable. I think Fauci wants it to be, because he's in charge when they have to intimidate people and saying this is the end of the world. If you don't do it, everybody's going to die. But his numbers have been wrong. The stats have been wrong, and they're designed for that purpose. And it's designed, I think, for a purpose. And I think there's when we talk about the consequences of all this, I like to try to clarify this, because I think it's important, because we have the coronavirus crisis, we have Black Lives Matter's violence in the city, and then we have the Federal Reserve. And I put a lot of blame on the Federal Reserve creating a mess and maybe giving an incentive to try to distract. So it's confusing, and I can see why a lot of American citizens would be confused about this and say, well, it's all the lockdown, and it's all the fact that Trump is president. He caused all this disease, I mean, the extremists that want to just blame everything on him. So it's a real contest to sort all this out. But one thing, though, more and more people, even those of us who think that they're overkill, we could improve this if we change policy. There's not many people in this country who would say, we don't have a problem. Everything is okay. But and I don't think there's anybody can say that the virus is a problem, but it's putting into the right perspective, to make people do the right things. But if you overreact to information and that is extreme and out of place, then you have a mess. And I think that's where we are. People have legitimate fears. They've been misled. But the one thing I personally am convinced of is things are much, much worse because of the lockdown and the misinformation, rather than the disease itself, as serious as that is and will continue to be. But we've presented it. You have gone over a lot of these charts with our viewers to show that the stats are getting better, but not many people are reporting them. So I hope we can get that message out. But the message of liberty, and the message of doing things the right way, and the message of not relying on government. I mean, if you rely on government, you have the conspiracy of Gates and Fauci. They're going to take care of us. So I think our goal, of course, reaching as many people as possible. And fortunately, I think that's always increasing. Hopefully, everybody will come to sanity someday and not be so hysterical.
Yeah, that would be nice. And we showed the clip in the opening because this is from Fauci did an interview with ABC News yesterday, and the headlines were and we saw it from that little clip. Hey, you got to now don't forget about your mask. That's last week. You got to put goggles on. You got to put goggles on your eyes because he said this is the only way of 100% guarantee protection. And I just wonder next week, is it going to be spacesuits, we got to put on to walk around? But it's interesting to see Fauci worshipped in the media and among people, just like Mueller was, if you remember, during the Mueller investigation. They even made little candles of him as a saint. That's how Fauci is treated. And anyone who questions him, as you said, is treated like a demon. If you suggest, well, maybe there might be some treatments to this, maybe there's no magic bullet, but maybe there's some treatments. No, you're terrible, you're off. But unlike with Mueller, the other half of the population that normally would be skeptical is terrified, or a lot of them are at least. So it's kind of interesting that way. But the other thing, and I just want to show one other clip before we click it back, but this is another thing that Fauci said during this interview, and it really struck me very strongly. And this is where basically, why don't we just go ahead and show that clip really quick if we can. Listen to this.
Hoping that there are two things that go on, that the wearing of masks and other coverings, as we just discussed, are going to not only protect us against COVID-19, but also help protect us against influenza. So we may find a secondary benefit of the lessons that we've learned over the past 6 months. That's one thing. The other thing is that it is...
Now, I'm sure you caught that, Dr. Paul. What he was saying basically was two things. First of all, get your flu shot, get your flu shot, get your flu shot. He said it 3 times, I think, at least in there. But the other thing is fascinating. He said, we're learning a lot from this coronavirus, from this COVID. We're learning that basically you have to wear your mask forever because the flu's coming, and we know now how wonderful the masks are. So mask up, get used to it. This is the new normal.
See, that statement should be what really frightens people, because this is not a one-season problem and they struggled and did a few dumb things, but they've learned their lesson that lockdown doesn't work. What they're saying is be prepared, but they've been saying that ever since the beginning. This thing has changed, and that's why I draw the analogy to TSA that we need temporary rules on getting on airplanes so we can prevent the terrorists from coming back. And yet TSA is still here and getting worse, and we've lost that liberty of being able to move around and lost the responsibility of who should be protecting us. But I'm glad that you dig up these clips, because the first time I read that, I said, he must be making a joke.
Yeah.
And these he's saying it, even though it's unbelievable. I guess if they say it enough, then more and more people will believe it. But one of the consequences of all this nonsense is the emotions and the hysteria with it. Now, people get mace sprayed in your face if they're in disagreement with you, without any reason to do that other than they disagree with you. But they've been mobilized to believe that this is serious. Anybody that doesn't wear a mask is going to kill me.
Yeah.
And then we've already seen some people getting killed by the people who are masked because you're not protecting. You're going to give me the disease.
Yeah.
And they've turned this into a hysterical reaction. That is dangerous. This is not much. It's tough to reason with people like that, And sometimes that's when I get into a group or people want to challenge me or a reporter, I don't want to even deal with that because I feel like it's a waste of time. I don't want to waste my time. I want to at least talk to people. I don't care how much they disagree with me, but I want to talk to people who are reasonable enough to discuss it and try to understand the politics of it, the medical aspects of it. But no, I think it's getting dangerous. So I just hope that we're able to, on our side of this argument, to maintain our cool.
Yeah.
And yet yesterday there was a Trump supporter just shot and killed. A black man was killed because it was just turned into hatred. And we've talked even probably when Trump started running, and especially the longer he was in office, that I always thought there was some jealousy that has turned into hatred. And now nothing happens that's not Trump's fault. I mean, and they're so hypocritical that if this would have happened under the Democrats, but the Republicans aren't innocent about this either. I mean, there is a partisan struggle there for power, but they won't deal in the issues unless it's spending money, running up death, and fighting wars.
Yeah.
Then they sort of put the other stuff aside.
Yeah, that's bipartisan.
That's what really bugs me.
I don't know if you saw this, Dr. Paul. I read it this morning, and I may have missed a couple of the details as in the state. I think it was in Florida, but there was a mother and a son were in a hotel, sitting in a hotel bench. They didn't have a mask on, and a guy came in and said, "You're not social distancing." And they ignored him, and he took out his gun and shot 4 times in the air. So that's how kooky people are getting.
It's getting bad.
But the thing, and I only do this half in jest, but the same Fauci that's telling us we got to wear masks, now we got to wear goggles, spacesuit is next. Let's look at this next clip. This is Fauci just a couple months ago. Dr. Fauci says you can hook up with a Tinder match who doesn't have symptoms, but only if you're willing to take a risk. This kind of activity is just fine. Anonymous relations, that's fine, but you better keep that mask on. I don't understand how this guy has any credibility.
Well, the only way you can understand it is to understand him.
Yeah.
Because he wants this to be perpetual. And can you see what kind of doors that opens up? If you're totally asymptomatic and you've never had a test, that you are a dangerous person until we test you or give you, your inoculation, give you your vaccine. And that's why he has to continue to build these fears. But that means that nobody is safe.
Yeah.
Nobody's safe. And then he'll come along and say, well, you better be careful, even if they have not had the virus and you don't know, you yourself, regardless, you better protect yourself. Somebody might be around, you don't want to be, which means permanency, and they want us to bow to the authorities. I think that's what's really behind their motivation.
And we wanted to talk something about the fallout of what's happening, because anytime you see a headline, and we're going to show some really even more startling than looking at Fauci, some really startling things up, but it's going to see the headline is always going to be the same: coronavirus caused ... But as we both know, that didn't cause it. The reaction did. So let's put up this first clip, Dr. Paul, and this is something that you know a lot more about than I do. But look at this: GDP second quarter crashes by a record 32.9%. Worse than the Great Depression. This is from our friends at Zero Hedge. And look at that red line there at the end.
Yeah, and I think this is real important. They probably have mentioned coronavirus in here, implied the coronavirus, and coronavirus did have something to do with this, obviously. But the coronavirus reaction, I believe, was resorted to because the Federal Reserve created this, spending created it, the interest rates of 0%, all this contributed to this. The policy of perpetual wars and the policies that we have, I think there's a lot of people, especially those who really own, quotes, own the Federal Reserve and benefits both by the cycles when it's in a boom period as well as in the bust period, they get bailed out. So you can't really go after the Federal Reserve, and this is a bipartisan support. So this is true that the economy is sharply down. It's really bad. I think we are in very, very bad conditions right now. But the whole thing is rarely do we see, some of our friends know and understand the Federal Reserve has a lot to do with this. But you just can't run an economy on fake money and do it forever. You can do it for a long time, especially if you have the reserve currency of the world and you're the kingpin and you win all the wars, except those that you don't win.
Yeah.
But I think it also represents a sign that the dollar is going to get weaker and has already started to get weaker. So all this is built in to building confidence. So there's a lot of objectivity in evaluating a market, but there's a lot of subjectivity involved too. Perceptions, anticipations, and confidence, because sometimes the government's doing things, nobody should have confidence in this, and that's the objective opinion. But subjectively say, oh, things are going good, I'm making a lot of money. And then later on, the subjectivity comes in and the reality comes in, and then it's worse than it was if it's worse than if you had dealt with it earlier on. But those numbers are very bad. I think they're going to get a lot worse. And I think this is the reason why I will continue to spend a lot of time, which is one of my motivations for getting into government, into Congress, and talking about this was, ever since the 70s, that it's so important that eventually they're going to destroy the money. They're going to destroy our country. So this is it's all interrelated. But right now, the biggest news right now is coronavirus, to be able to keep that scenario going. And of course, I think the violence on the streets is closely connected to that, because now we have governments that are protecting the violent people and not putting them in jail for breaking up things and stealing and destroying property, but they become protectors. You're not allowed to touch them. And get the police out. The police don't even need to be there. I mean, this is out of control, and all together helps make that number appear that way. And I think you think it can't get worse. I think it can get worse, because about all they've offered so far now is, well, there's more homeless than ever.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. It's all coronavirus. So we got to put them in the hotels, or they're literally putting people in hotel, the homeless, which were around before coronavirus, but there are more now. But now they're using hotels to house the homeless as a solution, and that of course can't do anything.
Yeah, it can. And I was wondering, it seems like the reaction to this downturn financially is exactly what they did in 2008, where they wanted to hide the fact that it was caused by the spending so they could keep the spending up.
Yeah.
But the hotel thing that you say is really important. We both watched the video. I watched it actually just before the show, because you recommended I watch it, and my jaw did hit the floor. These are $300 a night boutique hotels in New York City. All of a sudden, buses pulled up, and a bunch of homeless people jumped out. And I was looking at it, 139 hotels citywide. They interviewed some official and said, well, they're empty anyway, so why not? So they moved these people in, drug dealing, drug taking, on the streets in front of these hotels in the neighborhoods, getting more dangerous. And the people that actually lived there had no idea that their nice neighborhood now is being turned into a drug den and a homeless shelter.
The neighborhood argument is pretty good, because in libertarianism and free markets, you don't have to dump your garbage, into the guy's yard and say, well, you violated my property rights. But if you build something in your yard and you're 1 foot away from his property, and it's very, very dangerous, you don't build weapons and firecrackers and all, because there's a clear and present danger. But it has a neighborhood effect. If you're in a nice neighborhood, and the general rules have been you keep your property, especially if it's a private neighborhood, when you can do it. So this neighborhood thing is very important. But the other point I wanted to make on this is that the problems we have in coronavirus, the lockdown, is that now we're arguing about how to punish people, and people get mad and they get angry at everybody. And the hotels are empty, not only because of the bubble bursting of the Federal Reserve, but the coronavirus and all the rules.
Yeah.
And who wants to go to a hotel where hundreds of rules and you do this and that, and the hotels were losing jobs and the seats were empty. But I was thinking, they closed down because there were too many rules. They didn't make any sense. People quit doing to go to the hotel. So they go out and pick up thousands of people off the street and put them in. Do you think they are going to know about all the rules?
Yeah.
No, they're not going to have masks on any. They're not going to be easier to put masks on than others. It makes no sense. This is just authoritarian mistakes being corrected with more authoritarianism, and it's never worked before, and this won't work either. They have to introduce a really, really modern notion, and that is liberty for the individuals to make their own mind without creating any violence against another person.
And they want to hide the cost of their bad policies by hiding these guys away in these fancy hotels. The other thing we want to talk about in this section, about talking about the fallout from bad policies, not from coronavirus. Let's look at this next clip. We both looked at this earlier today. It's also from Zero Hedge, originally from Summit News. UN officials cite study that finds lockdowns and school closures killing more kids than COVID. And I dove a little bit into the study. It's a new study from The Lancet, which, despite its one thing, is still a respected publication. July 27th it came out, so a very recent study. They found that an additional 6.7 million children will face starvation in the first 12 months of the COVID pandemic. That's in addition to the normal, and more than 10,000 additional child deaths per month during the same period. UNICEF has said 128,000 excess deaths among children this year. So to fight a virus, viruses that come all the time, we've done something that may kill more children who don't die from this virus than the virus itself would kill people.
And, you know, the authoritarians have warned us this is going to continue because when we get rid of coronavirus, we'll have another one. We have to practice. This is a practice run, so we have to continue to do that. But what we're talking about here now is what is the real cost? Well, we know a little bit about that. We know that they pumped out $3 trillion, in the last couple of months. They have another $1 trillion getting ready to go, or $2 trillion. We know that the Fed's been very much involved. We're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars. That's one cost. But what we're talking here is the perpetual cost. If they undermine a system, not only will it affect the children at this point that are already suffering, it's going to last a long, long time until we figure out, or the others figure out what really is wrong. And it isn't a lack of a pseudo-compassion that will compel us to spend even more and more money. But the cost is there, and the one cost that we talk about, which I think is the most important one because of the solution, and that is the cost to our personal deliveries and self-reliance and the responsibility we have for taking care of ourselves. But the one type of person I think suffers the most from what we're talking about is, for decades now, we have, not we, but society have written a lot about the breaking up of the family, the single parent home, the single mother at home, who, and a lot of very, very good people have survived those circumstances, but a lot have suffered. So you have a single parent home, they live in a minority district or in a poor district, and they have children, they have a job, they're just getting by, and the kids have been going to school. And just think of the penalty she has. There's some other business people getting closed down and they suffer a lot. But you take that, that's like a 90% or more. I mean, that really will take courage. They're out there. They were already suffering from bad economic policy. I mean, they didn't write the laws and the tax codes that caused all this problem. But I think that's the individual that's going to suffer the most, and immediately. And then, of course, the generations are going, because the kids are going to be out in the street more than ever before, and the riots in the street, unfortunately, I'm afraid they're going to continue.
Yeah. Well, here's another fallout item, Dr. Paul, and this is also sad. If we could look at the next one, this is from Bloomberg, and it says almost 30 million in the U.S. didn't have enough to eat last week. And this is based on some information that came from the Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey. They've been doing this for the past 12 weeks to measure where people are at. And for the week ending July 21st, the people responding that sometimes or often they do not have enough food to eat in their house is at the highest point of the 12 weeks of this survey thus far, and it's increasing. So this is the real fallout. They want to say of coronavirus, no, of bad policies to address coronavirus.
Yeah, and a lot of that was coming, and bad economic policies and Federal Reserve policy contributes immensely to that. But coronavirus lockdown has really added a lot to that because of the movement of food and the breakup. We quit importing from here, and disruption and the slowing down and the mask you have to use. So it has made it worse. So people will say, well, there's people suffering out there. What are you libertarians going to do about it? And they'll say, and they do a pretty good job of putting a guilt trip, on individuals. And yet at the same time, it's the very policies that we've been following. It's been, topped off with this coronavirus and topped off with giving so much powerful recognition to Black Lives Matter on top of, the malinvestment and the deficit financing that has been ingrained in our system, for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And the one thing that bugs me the very high degree is this whole idea, the problems we're discussing. The Marxists come along and say, see, freedom doesn't work. You're capitalism. This is all your capitalism, which is an absolute lie. But who contributes to it? It's some of our pundits on our financial statements, the Republicans, and they never say, what we're doing is a disaster.
Yeah.
They say, well, you guys everybody went with the 3. Now we have a little bit more to go. And Republicans want $1 trillion. We're
Just a trillion, nothing.
And the Democrats want to get 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And that $1 trillion is the description because they're only for 1 instead of 2 trillion. Does that mean that means they're free market capitalists? It's a mess.
Well, one of the things we try to do is to provide some alternative narratives, because if you're watching the mainstream media, you're getting blasted over and over with the same thing. So I had a couple of little clips that I was going to go through, Dr. Paul, really quick to provide some alternative narrative, and I'm sure you'll have some comments too. Let's go to the first one. We'll do it quickly. Dutch government will not advise public to wear masks. This is the medical care minister, Tamara van Ark, and here's what she said, quote, "Because from a medical perspective there is no proven effectiveness of masks, the cabinet has decided there will be no national obligation for wearing non-medical masks." I found it interesting reading a little bit deeper into this article that they have a requirement that there be a distance of 1.5 meters, which is 5 feet. So apparently in Holland, Corona can only jump 5 feet. But in the U.S., of course, they can jump 6 feet. And let's look now back to Sweden. We've been hitting Sweden all week. Here's the architect of their response, the epidemiologist Anders Tegnell. He said, quote, "With numbers diminishing very quickly in Sweden, we see no point in wearing face masks in Sweden, not even on public transport." So, yeah, go ahead.
No, what crossed my mind there, it's sort of ironic. We were known as a country that defended liberty, and we stood up and spread that message around the world. And even in the war times, things, to beat Hitler and Tojo and these people were a benefit. And in some ways, we exported some mistakes, but we exported, the concept of liberty. That was what the revolution was about. But it seems like it's ironic now because we need it, and it's over here, even though some of our ideas originated in Europe, that they had slipped into terrible, terrible socialism and they were worse off. But you take a country, they resent it when the lefties in this country say, "Oh yeah, well we want to modify our socialism after the Netherlands." And Sweden. They don't like that because when you look at it, yes, they have socialist policies like we do, but even worse. And of course, they come across. Maybe they're just more sympathetic to civil liberties to allow the individuals to change, but they give economic reasons for this too. They said it doesn't make any sense. So they seem to be more objective to it. So I guess we're introducing liberty from some of the countries in Europe that are hanging on by the threads to some of those issues.
It's kind of embarrassing. Well, I'm going to do 2 more counter narratives, and then I'm going to close with the villain of the week. But let's do the next clip really quick, because I think this is interesting. Herd immunity may be developing in Mumbai's poorest areas. India is a pretty miserable place for the most part, I think, in terms of poverty and overpopulation. But what they found, they did a study in July, 6 out of 10 people in the slums of Mumbai have antibodies for coronavirus, showing that they have contracted and recovered from COVID. And it's sort of by default because they simply can't socially distance there and they don't have access to a lot of medical resources. So essentially what's happened is that the virus has gone through these neighborhoods in Mumbai, these slums in Mumbai. People have gotten it, some have died, I'm sure, but by and large have gotten over it, and they basically have herd immunity. 6 in 10 is herd immunity. So that goes counter to what almost every other country, Sweden and a few others accepted, have tried to do. And here's something else that's interesting, and I did look this up, and the timing is right. Someone had this on Twitter. This is Afghanistan's cases. Ruined and torn by civil war, Afghanistan has barely any healthcare system left. A brief lockdown was lifted as the nation had to choose between hunger and COVID. It braced for the worst, but then the unexpected happened. The pandemic burned out herd immunity, and it's another case where a ruined economy has sort of helped them in a way reach the herd immunity quicker. And I'm going to do a quick villain of the week. If we can go to the first clip, because I want to have that up, because we know who it is. That very first picture that I have, if we can put that up and go back to that. There we go. There's a villain of the week, Dr. Fauci. Remember, he went to the baseball game. He threw out the pitch. He was wearing number 19. Interesting, COVID-19. Threw out the pitch. I'm not going to make fun of his baseball skills. But then he went up and sat in the stands. This is perfect. This is like a Soviet commissar. None of the plebes were there. It was just him and his wife and their buddy. As they sat there, he wore his mask on when the camera was on him throwing out the pitch. But when he thought he wasn't being looked at, he pulled off his mask. His wife pulled off their masks. And here they sat up there, the king of the world, the great elites. And then he says, put on your goggles, guys. Put on your goggles. I'm not going to put on my mask. You put on your goggles. Tony Fauci, you are the villain of the week.
Very good. We better quit putting his picture up there. Oh, no, we need to keep putting it up there so they don't forget about being a villain, you know. So, you know, that Afghan chart that you put up there is very interesting. And you imply that, you know, they've been ravaged by war. They really don't have a medical system. It's sort of an anarchy, or people had to go back to normal things. And there are some normal things in medicine that's been a lot better than, you know, the drug-ridden medical culture that we have now. So they went back and they you know, did quite well. And I think that's, it's hard for us to accept that, but it fits into my argument that it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a separation of medicine and government. You know, I bet you if somebody really did some good research over 100 years or so, you'd find out that the government hasn't really helped medical care. A lot of there's been advancement. There's still a lot of good things in our medical system. Then they say, oh yeah, well they couldn't have done that if they hadn't gotten these billions of dollars from the taxpayer. And that's not true. In the early years, it was usually, you know, voluntary groups or private universities and all that developed these things. Sometimes they found things because there was freedom of movement almost by accident. But now, just think of the outrageous demand for this, vaccine. That is so horrible. And we've talked about that so much, it just makes no sense whatsoever. And it's probably going to kill people, you know, rather than help people. And then when you see a chart like this, well, they're doing pretty well. And I'm sure they probably didn't even have a vaccine or anything, you know, and there they are. So I'm still sticking with my argument that free individuals desire to be free and prosperous can take care of themselves much better than government bureaucrats and the Faucis of the world. That it doesn't work. It's never worked before. Bureaucracy doesn't work even if it's a friendly bureaucracy. Authoritarians are authoritarians no matter how they paint it. And I think that people need to have a little bit more confidence in what a free system is like, what individual liberty means, what responsibility for our actions mean. I think the world would be so much better, but there's only one rule. And this is what they won't accept. And the one rule is that governments can't disobey the law any more than an individual's not supposed to disobey the law. The governments and the people aren't allowed to lie, cheat, steal, and kill. They get away with it, but they shouldn't do it. But governments do it. Just think how much lying and cheating and stealing and killing and counterfeiting and wars that are totally unnecessary. So in a way, it's a negative thing. Get the government out of our way. Let the Afghan people take care of their medical needs and really get out of their way, and I think the whole world would be a lot better. I know our country would be a lot better if we were, emphasizing more the importance and the advantages of personal liberty and responsibility, rather than saying, well, how's the government going to take care of me? 30 million people are not getting enough food right now. Oh, it's because people won't have enough big enough food program. Rather than talking about how does it work in a free society, one thing people have to remember is the freer a society is, and the sounder their economy, the sounder the economy is, and the monetary system is, the bigger the middle class and the wealthier the middle class is. And yet, right now, everything is drawn, to the middle class and the poor. And yet, we and our government and our policies have created that, and everything we're doing right now, I say, is just delaying the correction because they're not talking about the right thing. And you can get a hint of what we ought to do if you read Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. That tells you what the government should be allowed to do. But I'll tell you what, not many people that I know who take an oath to obey that give a darn about it. And that's what we have to change. And we will keep talking to as many people as we can. And I think there's every reason to believe that in time it'll get better. But in the short time, we have a lot of work to do. And I thank you very much for being a participant and joining us each day in this program. And please return to the Liberty Report soon.